Thank you for viewing this program presented by the Yavapai Group of the Grand Canyon chapter of the Sierra Club. I'm Gary Beverly, chair of the Yavapai Group. If you would like to receive our monthly newsletter, email me, and I'll put that email address in the chat in a few minutes. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be available on the Grand Canyon chapter YouTube channel, which has dozens of really interesting program videos, and I'll put that link in the chat in a moment also. So the Grand Canyon chapter covers the state of Arizona. We have more than 60,000 members and supporters in the state. Our mission is to explore, enjoy, and protect. Of all the spectacular landscapes in Arizona, the Grand Canyon is the most astonishing and stupendous, one of the natural wonders of the world. We are incredibly privileged to live near the canyon, and that privilege creates a responsibility to help protect it. This is a key purpose of the Grand Canyon chapter of the Sierra Club. The canyon is huge and ancient, but it is threatened. Despite the recent snowfall, the waters of the Grand Canyon region remain vulnerable to drought, depletion, and contamination. Enormous developments are proposed on the south rim. Dams are proposed on the Little Colorado River. Mining and development threaten the groundwater that emerges as springs below the canyon rim, springs that are essential to the survival of people, plants, and wildlife. The river itself is threatened by decades of drought and climate change. As states quibble over diminishing water resources, it's vital that we ensure the health of the Colorado River and its tributaries in the Grand Canyon. The canyon needs us to protect it from us. The Grand Canyon chapter of the Sierra Club was established to protect the Grand Canyon from dams and destruction. We have kept out the dams, but our work is not done. In tonight's program, Grand Canyon chapter program manager Allison Gitlin will describe our ongoing work to protect the river, groundwater, and springs. Allison will give us an update on some of the major threats and what the Grand Canyon chapter is doing to help protect this important place. So responding to questions is a major part of this presentation. Viewers can submit questions at any time using the chat button in the bottom bar of your screen. After the presentation, we will first respond to the written questions and then open up to verbal questions. So with that, let's get started with today's presentation. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And I'm so glad that you're all here. It is snowing cats and dogs out, and so it is a wonderful night to be warm and cozy and watch a webinar. So I'm glad you're all here. If you'd like, you could go into the chat and talk about, introduce yourself, say where you're from, where you're joining us from this evening. I always like to find out who's in the audience. I'm going to talk for about 30 or 40 minutes tonight, and I hope you stick around till the end, because in the end, I'm going to talk about some things that we all need to do to protect the Colorado River. And I'm going to talk a little bit about springs and the river tonight. So with that, I will go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. And yeah, I do ask that you hold your questions to the end, as Gary said. So, all right. Are you all seeing my PowerPoint there now? Hopefully, yes. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so tonight I'm going to talk about protecting Grand Canyon's waters. I know some of you on here are very familiar with the canyon and the waters of Grand Canyon, and some of you may be less familiar. So I'm going to go through a little introduction to the hydrology, and then I'm going to talk about some projects affecting the springs, and then I'll talk about the river. So what do I mean when I'm talking about the waters of Grand Canyon? Obviously, water takes many incarnations, and some of the things that affect the water are climate related, others are more direct and acute. And so I'm not going to talk about the climate tonight, but I do want to mention that that is a big threat to Grand Canyon. But I'm going to talk about the river. I'm going to talk about the fragile springs. Oops, sorry, I am having issues with my slide changes. There we go. and I'm going to talk about the Colorado River, as I mentioned. And I want to start by acknowledging that when I talk about protecting Grand Canyon, that there are many people who have been and continue to protect this canyon and protect the Colorado River and the springs. And I think a big part of my job is to listen to people who know this area best and who have lived here since time immemorial. And so I am going to talk about protecting the canyon, but I want to acknowledge that I approach this with humility, and I feel very honored to be able to work in this region. So first of all, can you hear that? Can I get some nods if the sound is coming through on the video? Yes, okay, good, because I have some other videos that I'm going to want the sound to come through. So that was a little test. Why are springs so special? Well, Grand Canyon Springs, even those with just the tiniest amount of water, can support, in some cases, hundreds of times the number of species as the surrounding landscape. Springs allow us to migrate, to get to different climatic areas. They allow humans and wildlife to move through the canyon. They offer areas of cooling, and of course, water is life. Oops, and I didn't mean to do that a second time. Okay. So this is a very, very small introduction to Grand Canyon's hydrology. But one of the amazing things about Grand Canyon is that we are in a karst landscape. And what that means is that there is limestone and highly erodible rocks, rocks that dissolve really easily. And so a lot of the way that water moves through the ground around Grand Canyon is through the karst topography. So it moves through caves and underground caverns. It moves through fractures and faults and through sinkholes. And so this is a very rough schematic, but you can see here that in some places water might move very quickly, and in other places adjacent, it might move very slowly. And it may split into different areas and emerge at springs in very different locations, or in other places it may converge. And why this is important is because it makes the landscape very vulnerable to contamination, because if contaminants are to get into the wrong area, they may be able to move or mix very rapidly. And here you just see a little bit of the red wall limestone. You know, as it moves through the canyon, we've got kind of a cross-section view, and you can see here, it looks kind of like Swiss cheese, right? Like we've got all these holes, and we don't know if those are caves or if they connect to one another, if they hold water, or if water might move through them during certain periods. And this is just what we can see, but the red wall limestone beneath the ground has these kinds of features throughout it. So even if you're standing on land where the red wall is 2,000 feet below you, be aware that there may be this kind of Swiss cheese going on 2,000 feet below the ground, and water may move in a very unpredictable manner through it. So I'm going to talk about two different things that are threatening springs in Grand Canyon right now. And I'll try and talk a little bit about what we can do, and then I'm going to switch to the river. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the 2CN development. And this is very confusing, even for people who've been involved with this issue for decades. So I'm going to try and break it down into bite-sized pieces. So I'm going to start by showing you some maps. And so here you could see the purple is Grand Canyon National Park. The green is the Kaibab National Forest, and the white is private property. The black outline there is the incorporated part of 2CN. So it's at the gateway of the Grand Canyon. It's what you go through if you drive to the South Rim entrance gate. And you can see that you pass through the town and you pass by the Grand Canyon Airport. There are two different developments that are being proposed for Grand Canyon right now, or for 2CN right now. And one of them, I'm going to refer to it as one development, but it is split between these two parcels. And the interesting thing here is that the a road and utility easement would need to cross through the national forest to get to those two parcels in order to enable this large mega development to occur. And so right now, the developer, who's the Italian developer Stilo, has an application into the national forest for a special use permit that would enable that road and utility easement. The second development that I'm going to talk about is on what is called the Camper Village parcel, which is in the developed part of town. So it would be a type of redevelopment project on an area that is currently a campground and a trailer park. So I'm going to start by talking about the Stilo developments, which are on what are called the Kotzen and 10X parcels. And we have literally been fighting this development for about a quarter of a century. This was originally proposed in the 1990s, and there was a vote. It was county property, or it was property within the county, and there was a vote against a land trade, and 2-1, the citizens of Coconino County voted against it. And so that went down. And after that, they got the law changed so that the town could incorporate, even though it only had about 500 people living in it. And once they incorporated, they were able to annex that property. This, believe it or not, is an actual frame from a promotional video that Stilo, that the developer made to promote this project with potential investors. And we found this video online a few years ago, and we started to get it out to the media, at which time Stilo wiped the internet of any trace of its existence. But we still have it. And we also have one of the employees of Stilo on a microphone recording, talking to a town council member about this video. So we know that this is accurately what they were proposing. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of this. If you've seen me speak about this, you've seen some of this before. I'm going to show you just two short clips, but they are very entertaining, and I promise they are worth sticking around till the end of, they're just a couple minutes, and they are fascinating. So first, we're going to let this guy tell us what's wrong with Grand Canyon. Oops. Hopefully.
There's no other canyon like it in the world, and it's ours. But there's a unique situation surrounding this beauty and the millions who visit here, a situation which asks the question, now that you've seen the canyon, what are you going to do next? This presents a dilemma for the traveler, but an opportunity for us. Because you see, unlike other tourist destinations with wonderful entertainment, educational and relaxing leisure activities and venues, there are virtually none at the Grand Canyon.
So I can't relax at Grand Canyon because it is not enough like New York City, is essentially what's going on. And I want to play this just so you understand. This is Tom DiPaolo, who's an employee of Stilo, speaking to one of the Tucson Town Council members about this video.
So this is the link to the video, and it's probably
That's on our website. Now, keep in mind, we don't advertise that because the video is primarily for Europe. You know, we always wanted the right kind of partners on the different pieces, particularly Insight, things like that, the Native American Cultural Center. So it may be a little more commercial and you might even be comfortable with. No, if you go to our website, you'll see the video.
I hate to say this.
Okay, so you just heard him say that he is more interested in cultivating European partners for the Native American Cultural Center than people who live here. For example, Native Americans themselves. And you also heard him say that this might be more commercial than you might be comfortable with. So I'm just going to show you one more short clip, and this is them showing us actually what they have planned for the property. Whoops, I'm so sorry. I am having issues with buttons.
Let me take you back to the Tucson of the future, the way it should be and could be as a unique, viable, profitable development. Stilo is the owner of 2 properties bordering the town and a joint venture partner in a third located within the 143-acre boundary. Our 160-acre Kotzen Ranch property offers us the opportunity to realize our plan for a wide range of visitor-oriented services. Services envisioned to provide a more inclusive, more rewarding, and in-depth experience of education and entertainment over a longer period of time. An environment of learning and leisure to more fully complement visitors' experience at the canyon. Services including fresh new lodging, a pedestrian-friendly village center offering extensive retail, dining, and entertainment venues. The 35-acre Insight Educational Campus will offer a Smithsonian-quality edutainment environment of interconnected pavilions filled with technology, innovation, and opportunity for learning and experiencing the history and growth of the area. Insight incorporates the appeal of an Epcot Center or Universal Studios, combined with the uniqueness of the Northern Arizona history. As you walk through the Insight environment, you'll see new exhibits, exciting new presentations, bringing together the regimens of natural forestry, the history of geology, the power of hydrology, the day-to-day presence of wildlife, the need for and growth of sustainable development, the history and dignity of local Native American cultures, and the beauty of the night sky shown like never before. Insight is a personal, creative, and technological involvement never before experienced by the traveling public. This project also has the opportunity to develop open-air venues for music and entertainment that will rival Virginia's Wolf Trap or Colorado's Red Rock Amphitheater. Doesn't it make good business sense to expand and provide services and create entertainment and educational venues in this magnificent setting, thereby enhancing the experience and extending the stay for millions of tourists, all who bring billions of dollars for their traveling pleasure?
Yeah, so a few things there. That guy is obsessed with money and profit. And raise your hand if you saw Bryce Canyon in there. They don't even know what canyon they're at. So yeah, it's going to be a very large development is what they're proposing. And so this is what's zoned for. So this is just an interpolation based on the zoning. We think they could build more than 2.6 million square feet of commercial space that could include retail, restaurant, entertainment. In the past, there's been various things mentioned, like the concert venue, edutainment center, thousands of hotel rooms, and about 2,200 new housing units. And it could multiply the population of Tucson by 10 and would substantially increase the number of people visiting the area and staying for multiple days. So all of this would increase the water use. If you brought this up to them, they would probably give you this table. And so this is a table that was presented to the Forest Service. Don't worry about all the numbers. But if you see in the upper left corner, it says 33% reduction. So what they are telling the Forest Service is that they actually plan to decrease what they're going to build by 33% over some previous plan that they had that they never showed us. This is kind of a farce because they are not allowing anything legal to be done that would actually reduce the zoning. So if they get permission to build their mega development, they could flip the property to someone else who could build what it's zoned for, or they themselves could eventually build out to what it's zoned for. So the Forest Service has this proposal. If they consider it, they need to go do a NEPA process or prepare an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement. And we are telling them that they should be considering full build out, but not this 33% reduction. If you notice in there, they also have a gray out area of residential. They're not telling us how many residential units they would build, but they did say in the proposal that a number of those residences would actually be short-term rentals. So does that mean they're residences, or does that mean that they are commercial? And then they're also saying that they won't use groundwater for commercial, but they're not saying where they're going to get that water from. They're just saying that they're going to truck it in. And if you've been in Northern Arizona for the last 4 weeks or 5 weeks or so, the road to Grand Canyon has closed several times. So if you have an entire town that is dependent upon you trucking in water, you are setting yourselves up for a problem. And so this is a quote from an Arizona Daily Sun article from 2014, where the Park Service estimated that the water use in Tusayan could skyrocket from 175 acre feet to 681 acre feet. And so I did the math, and 175 acre feet is about 57 million gallons, and 681 acre feet is about 221 million gallons. Well, in the last couple of years, this report has come out because the owners of the water system in Tusayan are trying to sell off their water system. So they're trying to sell their wells. And so this is what they estimate to be the delivery capability of their well system in town. And if you notice, the last line of that says surplus available would be about 25 million gallons. So what Stilo would need for their development would be an order of magnitude larger than that. They need 220 million gallons. And they have not made clear where they're going to get that. We've suspected perhaps from the Colorado River, but if anybody's been watching the news, you know that there is no surplus water in the Colorado River right now. So essentially this would be a development that would be built that would deplete the aquifer and set a lot of people up for failure. And so I'm going to talk about this other development also on the Camper Village parcel. So this is a partnership between the California developer EKN and Stilo. And what they want to build is on this 20 acre parcel. So here you could see some of their other projects. They're very boxy. On the top right, you can see that red square. That's the parcel they want to build on. And what they are looking to build is approximately 900 hotel rooms in 2 phases, along with housing for 100 people. They also want a cultural edutainment center because edutainment seems to be the way to sell anything, restaurants and retail. And so they're not saying where their own employees would live, but the amount of water that they estimate they would need would also deplete that amount of water that Hydro Resources has available. And so essentially before Stilo even gets a chance to build, the aquifer could be dried out. And that's water that would be going to springs. And so it's very unclear. When the developer hosted a public meeting that I attended, he said, there is enough water in Tusayan to serve me, but if I need more, I'll go to Valley, which has been renamed to Grand Canyon Junction, but some of you might know it as Valley, which is the next town over. And if I need more than that, I'll truck in a little extra. Again, he didn't say from where. So our concerns, obviously the big one is water, but we also worry about traffic, noise, litter, wildlife disturbances. This is all going to be in a floodplain, and negative effects on the park by bringing more multi-day visitors. We know that the park has infrastructure issues and it has water problems of its own. So we are watching this. So what Sierra Club has done, we are communicating with the Forest Service. We sent them a long letter. We're working with a coalition of other environmental groups, and also in communication with the Havasupai tribe about this. And we're making sure that the Forest Service knows the risks. But right now we're waiting for the Forest Service to decide how to proceed. So stay tuned, pay attention, because there may be a chance for the public to comment on this. And last time there was a public comment process, 200,000 of you spoke up and the Forest Service rejected the previous proposal. So, that was the public that did that. And I think it's really important that we pay attention and be ready again. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is uranium mining. Sorry, I am having slide moving issues. Sorry. Okay. And again, here's another different type of schematic of how groundwater moves through the region. And I want to point out that there's two main aquifers. There's a shallow for Arizona aquifer, that's the Coconino aquifer, and that might be like a few hundred feet below the surface. And then there's the Redwall Muav aquifer, which is about 2,000 feet below the surface. And the uranium in this region, they tend to be very small deposits that form in what are called breccia pipes. So these are these vertical columns that have a broken rock type called breccia. They once had a lot of fluid in there, and so they tend to have a lot of metals and minerals deposited. And they also tend to be places that water moves through, although our local mine, the miners claim that no water can go through because everything is perfectly cemented and there's no fractures anywhere. But the Coconino aquifer does interact with these areas, and they are above the Redwall Muav. And the Redwall Muav is important because it is the source of our largest springs. So springs like Havasupai and Garden Spring are Redwall Muav aquifer springs. So here's what the mine looks like and where it's located. It's southeast of the town of Tusayan, and it's about 20-acre site. And we call it a zombie mine because it originally was approved in 1986, but the price of uranium dropped in the 90s, and they reinitiated getting the mine going when the price of uranium went up around 2007. And then it's been sitting again in various stages of development and being idle. And this also we have been fighting with the leadership of the Havasupai tribe. We have been fighting this mine since the 1980s. So Grand Canyon, things move really slowly here. But we're always trying to fight against people trying to make a buck off Grand Canyon. So in 2010, the Red Butte area was declared a traditional cultural property. And in 2012, a 20-year mining ban began on about 1 million acres surrounding Grand Canyon. But also in 2012, the Kaibab approved this mine, essentially grandfathering it in so that the temporary mining ban wouldn't affect it. And then in 2016, the mine struck a lot of water. And so some of us showed up on site and saw this happening. Just all this water being sprayed in the air. And the photo on the right is a photo of that spray just going right through the fence. And that's notable because there are high levels of radium in the soil on the fence line, but the Forest Service claims that there's never been any water that's gone through, even though we've supplied them with these images. There's been about 8 to 10 million gallons per year pumped out of this mine, and the water has about 3 to 4 times the safe drinking water standards for uranium and about 20 times the drinking water standards for arsenic. And unfortunately, this water is sitting in a pond and wildlife is accessing this pond and drinking it. And so that's a huge concern for us. And the Fish and Wildlife Service has best management practices that they established, but they're all just suggestions. Nothing is set in stone. So they don't have to cover the pond or keep wildlife out of it or haze them in any way. This bottom of the fence has been fixed up a bit. It's no longer just tires and pieces of wood stuck against the fence line, but it is, the animals are still getting under the fence. And this is what it looks like today. So you can see the sprayers on this very large pond. And this is a video from a couple weeks ago or last fall. And so you can see that they operate these sprayers on very, very windy days, and the water spray continues to just float out into the area. And recently we're working with a large number of other conservation groups and tribal entities and trying to fight this mine and trying to fight all uranium mining around Grand Canyon. But a few weeks ago, we put out this press release along with the Havasupai tribe and a number of others, because they started posting ads and they made an announcement and put out a press release saying that they were going to start to develop the Pinyon Plain mine, formerly called Canyon Mine. And so we're very worried about this, and we're trying to figure out what we can do about it. And so right now, there's a lot of conversations going on. We did have a bill that passed the House last year and was introduced in the Senate, but never got out of the Senate, called the Grand Canyon Protection Act. That bill has been introduced in various incarnations over the last several years, but it has not gotten out of Congress yet, and that would have permanently protected the area from uranium mining. We've also had some national monument proposals, which could have been signed by a president, that also would have protected the area from uranium mining and potentially also other things like old growth logging, and those have not moved forward either. So right now, there is a consortium of tribes who are talking amongst themselves and trying to figure out, and we're kind of in a holding pattern. We're waiting to hear from tribal entities of what protection of this area would look like for them, and also trying to figure out what the next step should be on this particular mine. So I'm sorry that I don't have an action item right now, but believe me, there will be action items on this coming up throughout the year. So the third thing I want to talk about is the Colorado River, and I will have action items on this, so please stay tuned. And there's many threats to the Colorado River. For example, water demand, climate disruption and aridity, dams and reservoirs, which not only block the river and stop species from migrating, such as the Colorado pike minnow that once migrated for hundreds of miles along the river basin, but the dams and reservoirs also do things like remove sediment from the water, make the sediment settle out in certain areas and starve it in other areas. They also prevent the flow from, so there's no floods at times when there would have been historically timed floods. And then there's also introduced aquatic species. So a lot going on in the Colorado River and Grand Canyon. Despite all of this, we have one of the best native fish assemblages of anywhere in the Colorado River Basin. And these fish they unfortunately require a very high degree of management because they are living a very tenuous existence. Most of them are taking refuge in the tributaries. And so if we get certain non-native species introduced into those tributaries, these populations could be decimated. And there are regular efforts to remove non-native species. And I just want to offer a huge debt of gratitude to Ed Moss for sharing these photos with me. So to give you a little introduction to Glen Canyon Dam, you've probably been seeing a lot of this in the news lately, but a lot of people don't realize how water actually moves through the dam. There are two inlets that allow water to move through the dam. The upper one is the hydropower inlet, so that takes in water and sends them through the turbines. And then there's a lower river outlet works, but that river outlet works is only about 100 feet below the hydropower penstocks, and both of them are quite a ways above the river floor. And right now we are about 30 feet. Lake Powell is at its lowest elevation ever since filling, and it's about 30 feet above those hydropower penstocks. The problem is, 30 feet, not above the penstocks, 30 feet above a level that we consider to be minimum power pool. And the reason that level is actually a little bit higher than the penstocks is because if it gets too low, giant whirlpools will form and they will suck air through the dam and destroy the dam. So it will be quite a sight to see if it happens, but a lot of people are hoping that doesn't happen. So last year's projection for the elevation of Lake Powell said that there was a fairly decent chance that the water level would actually drop below minimum power pool. So this is a chart showing the projections from July of 2022 out through to June 2024. And you could see that minimum line does cross below minimum power pool. This year's projection, because of all the snow in the Colorado River Basin, is saying there's only like a 3% or lower chance that that level will actually be hit before December 2024. I'm not sure if I believe that, but it's better than it was. And so at least for 2 years, they're saying we won't hit minimum power pole. If you ask me, that means we should be planning right now for what's going to happen if we hit minimum power pole, because 2 years is not very long and we have no idea what's going to happen after that. And we should have known this. I mean, we should have known this in 1922 when the Colorado River Compact was signed. We should have known this when this graph came out that showed that supply was greater than demand. And this came out, this is from a 2013 fact sheet based on a report that actually came out the year prior. But if we would have started planning then, we're now in 2023. So we would have been working on this for a decade. And instead we're acting like nobody told us this could possibly happen. So right now there's a number of things going on. One of them is, you probably heard that the states are trying to figure out what kind of compromise they can come to divide up water. And the federal government is trying to figure out how they might change their operations at Glen Canyon Dam and Hoover Dam to operate Lake Powell and Lake Mead in a different way to continue to be able to supply water to the lower basin. And this has been all over the news. I could have added another 100 headlines to this slide. The one thing that you will notice is that none of these headlines says Grand Canyon. Everybody is treating Grand Canyon like it is a pipeline between two reservoirs. Everybody is talking about how to save Glen Canyon Dam. Everybody is talking about how to avoid reaching minimum power pole in Lake Mead also. Nobody is talking about how we protect Grand Canyon. And this is really important because we are not talking about a pipeline between two reservoirs. We are talking about a place that is full of life and a very, very important place. So Sierra Club did comment on this, this supplemental EIS that is being proposed that would change operations at Glen Canyon and Hoover Dam. And we actually sent in 2 sets of comments, one that covered the entire basin and one that was Grand Canyon specific. And we had 6 recommendations. And I think that it's really important that everybody ask for these similar things if they can. So 3 of the recommendations dealt with the health of the river and flows in the river, and then 3 of them dealt with the dam and operations of the dam itself. And so what we said is that the purpose and need of this project needs to include protection and restoration of the Colorado River ecosystem in Grand Canyon as required by laws such as the Grand Canyon Protection Act of 1992. And there is a legal mandate that Glen Canyon Dam be operated for the improvement and enhancement of Grand Canyon. There actually isn't really a legal framework that says that it needs to be operated for hydropower. Hydropower, according to Colorado River Basin Storage Project, is supposed to be incident to other uses of the dam. We want the flows to mimic a natural flow. So doing things like minimizing daily fluctuations, mimicking the pre-dam flood pulse timing when the high flows were, optimizing sediment retention downstream. So high flows only happen when there's enough sediment below the dam that they won't be scouring and eroding all of the beaches and sandbars, and then also maintaining protective water temperatures. And then requiring flows that maintain and benefit the fish and the sandbars, and not using low water as an excuse to avoid environmental flows. And then our other 3 recommendations had to do with the operation of the dam. So immediately planning for a way to move water around the base of the dam. This has to happen right now. And there's a few reasons for this. But one of them is that we might want to put more water in Lake Mead so that we can concentrate and produce hydropower from that dam. And we need a way to make sure that if we keep Powell low, that we can get water around that dam. We also want a way to move water that's cooler and different temperatures so that we could have a warmer river or a cooler river, depending on what our ecological needs are. And we also want to just plain eliminate the possibility of dead pool. We also asked them to study water seepage and evaporation between different reservoir storage alternatives. So like, would you be risking less evaporation if you had all of your water in one reservoir instead of in two. And then we asked them to implement fish screening above the dam. Now, some of this seems a little weird, but it's because there are a lot of different Colorado River proposals going on, some ecological, some water management, and they're not talking to each other enough. They're all kind of ignoring each other. And so we want to make sure that the same recommendations go on for these different processes. And so one of the things that we asked for, the idea that there might be manipulations of the dam or engineering to allow water to move through the dam in a different way, that has actually started. And there was a webinar on it a couple of weeks ago, but it's going to be at least a 10-year time frame before implementation. And I don't know if we have 10 years. So we need to push that process quickly. Another thing going on with the Colorado River is that we are starting to get warm water, non-native fish that some of them are actually swimming through the dam, like the smallmouth bass. And the smallmouth bass have been found in Grand Canyon before, but what's different this year is that the water temperature is so high that they have reproduced in Grand Canyon for the first time. And so there's a proposal to try and find a way to get colder water to have kind of a flushing flow that would come through with cold water that would hopefully prevent these fish from spawning again. And that proposal is actually going to come out tomorrow. So we had this webinar one day too soon for me to give you a link to an action alert, but keep an eye out for that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The thing is that natural processes do matter. In every river where we have experimented with historically timed, naturally timed flood flows and other ecological parameters that mimic pre-dam processes, we have had ecological benefits that have ranged from the fish to the trees to the beaches. Everything benefits. It's just amazing. Once you put the conditions back to the way they were, or even something that mocks the way they were on a smaller scale, you get ecological benefits. Natural processes matter. But yet, if you look at the headline on the right here, for the last couple of years, even though there's been plenty of sediment in Grand Canyon below the dam, the federal government has refused to allow high flows because the states and the hydropower entities don't want them. And this is frustrating because it wouldn't actually change the total amount of water that's moved through the dam, because it would be offset. High flows would be offset with lower flows at different times of the year. But the states and the hydropower entities have so much power, no pun intended, but they have been able to put these things, just keep these things from happening because they're afraid of the optics. So what we all need to do, we need to be speaking up for a healthy Colorado River at every chance we get. So the smallmouth bass environmental assessment is supposed to be out tomorrow. It's going to have a 14-day comment period. We will have some kind of action alert up on the Sierra Club website. But of course, I'm gonna have to look at that before I get that up. So it might not be up till Monday. But we will get something up. But regardless, you can search for this online, you can look for how to comment, and you can send in your own personal comment, which honestly is probably a little bit better than sending in an action alert, because seeing that the public is taking the time and the initiative to send these letters in makes a big difference. You should just write a letter, speak up for threatened and endangered species in Grand Canyon, advocate for a healthy Colorado River, and in particular say that the environmental flow alternatives are essential, that we need to operate this dam for the benefit of Grand Canyon's ecology and its people. You can write letters to the editor and op-eds talking about the importance of a healthy Grand Canyon, talking about the importance of operating Grand Canyon Dam for the benefit of Grand Canyon, having healthy flows come through the canyon, properly timed flood flows, flows that are going to redistribute the sediment and repair the beaches, and flows that are going to protect the native species by fixing problems with water quality and temperature. Engage with all these public processes that come out regarding dam modifications or operational strategies or flow management, because there's several happening, and in all of them, you need to say, a healthy Grand Canyon is important. Even if the process doesn't seem like it's directly about Grand Canyon, that's part of the problem. We need to tell them, you can't just run water through Grand Canyon. The last time they did one of these, they did what was called a balancing tier flow, running water so that they would balance Lake Mead with Lake Powell. They did irreparable harm to Grand Canyon because they just let these high flows go during a time of low sediment availability, and they stripped the beaches of millions of tons of sediment that will never be replaced. And then speak up at public meetings for environmental flows. And this is really important. There's a quarterly meeting of the Glen Canyon Dam, what's called the Adaptive Management Working Group, affectionately called AMWG, AMWG. And at the end of this, they have a public comment period, and you can look at the agenda and figure out when that public comment is. And this is a group of states, tribes, hydropower, recreation, conservation. I don't remember who else, but it's a group that meets quarterly, and then they give recommendations to the Secretary of Interior on how to operate Glen Canyon Dam. And you can go in there and you can speak in the public comment and say, I want environmental flows that are going to protect Grand Canyon. And they would love to hear from the public. They almost never hear from the public. They hear from people like me who are representing an organization, but they would really, really love to hear from the public, and they will listen to you. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. If you'd like to sign up for emails, they go out every 1 to 2 months. I won't send too many, but if you want to be notified about that smallmouth bass process, for example, I have one I think is going out on Monday that'll talk about that a bit. And so you can go to bit.ly/Grand Canyon Alerts and sign up, or you could take a photo of that QR code there. You can also email me. My email is there, allison.gitlin@sierraclub.org. You're always welcome if you have questions about the river or about springs or about, I read in the paper that Stilo is not going to do any harm to Grand Canyon. What do you think of that? I'm happy to talk to you about this. So with that, I want to thank you so much for your time, and I will take questions.
Okay, great. There's not many questions in the chat, so I've got a couple here. Meanwhile, go ahead and enter your questions in the chat, please. So Allison, you didn't, what's the current status of the plans to put pump storage dams on the Little Colorado?
Yeah, I was covering a lot of ground, so I'm sorry that I did not cover that one. There is still a proposal to put a pump storage project in Big Canyon, which is a tributary of the Colorado River, or sorry, tributary of the Little Colorado River. It is on Navajo Nation property, and the idea is that there would be pumps that would pump water to the surface and fill this reservoir, and then they would allow water to flow down when there is power needs, and then they would capture that water and pump it back up when there's like surplus power in the system. It's kind of a hydrological battery. The Navajo Nation was not consulted about that proposal, and so the Navajo Nation actually opposed it, and those who are proposing the project cannot access the property without having Navajo Nation permission. And so right now, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is kind of sitting on it. It's strange. They haven't granted any kind of preliminary permit to the proposers to be able to go in and do any research on site. And so it's in a bit of a limbo. In the meanwhile, there are also some other pump storage projects that are proposed on Hopi land and on the Black Mesa area, and the tribes are opposing those as well, or some tribal entities are opposing those. I should clarify, not all. But my opinion on this is that if there are to be power projects on tribal, on reservation land, it should be tribal entities that are running them. It shouldn't be people coming in from offsite and promising jobs and a cut of the profits. It should be the tribes who are doing this themselves in places that are appropriate to them. The Little Colorado River proposal is inappropriate for many reasons. It's a very, very, very important place to many, many tribes. And so there is a group of tribal members that are meeting regularly, and they are trying to get a bill through the Navajo Nation that would permanently protect that area. And so Sierra Club's role has really just been to support those who are doing the work on the ground, because it's really not a place for us to come in and tell the Navajo Nation or Hopi Tribe or anyone else who's affiliated with the site what to do. But we are supporting them. We are participating in phone calls and helping them get their message out by any means we can.
Great. Any other questions? There's one comment in the chat. Oh my God, don't Disney our Grand Canyon. But if somebody else wants to speak up, unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yes, Alice, can you hear me?
Yes.
So is the uranium mine south of Tucson, is that still active?
It is about to become active. So they've been in development since the 80s on and off, and they just made an announcement not too long ago that they're gonna continue development. They are planning to actually start to extract ore. So right now they're installing a ventilation shaft that has to be done. They'll have to meet some EPA criteria for radon, and then they'll be able to extract ore. So we're going to continue to fight it. We're trying to figure out how, but there are a lot of people who want to continue to fight that mine. And I'm not sure what's going to happen, but their plan is to begin extracting ore probably within the next 2 years, I would guess. Yeah, that's a total guess on the timeline. I don't know the timeline, but I just know that they are initiating operations.
And isn't the water pumping that you had the video of, isn't that impacting the aquifers in that same region?
Yeah, and it's a really good question of what's going on, because so they had to do what's called a permeability test, where they took a core out of the bottom of the mine to see if water could move through the rock at the bottom of the mine. They failed that permeability test. So water was able to move. So they lined the bottom of the mine shaft, but there's water pouring down the walls. And so we don't know if like water is able to get like behind the liner, if it's able to infiltrate in any other places, if there's fractures. They're claiming that there are no fractures and it's totally cemented and there's no way that water can move through. But yeah, water's moving in, so why wouldn't it be able to move out? And the water in the surrounding area does not have elevated levels of uranium and arsenic that we know of. The problem is that there's very poor monitoring. So there's one Redwall Moab aquifer monitoring well. There's one USGS Coconino aquifer monitoring well. And then there's 3 other Coconino wells that don't monitor for water quality. They're just monitoring for depth to the water to try and figure out what direction the water is flowing. And so it's really a mess, because if there is any contamination getting into the deeper Redwall Moab aquifer, we may not know about it until it emerges at a spring. And that's a really sad state, because we don't know, we've never successfully cleaned up uranium contaminated groundwater. So it's a problem. And that's why, in particular, that's why it's really nerve-wracking to the Havasupai tribe. But besides the fact that it's in their traditional cultural landscape, that is, a part of their origin story, it's also potentially going to impact the water, and they are the people of the blue-green water. Like, that's their identity, is based on this water. So You know, there's contamination and there's depletion potential because they're pumping water out of the ground, and we don't think they're controlling it in the ground very well. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but yes, there is reason for concern. And I see a question in the chat that says, could we reach out to our senators? So the problem is that people love to campaign on protecting Grand Canyon, but when it comes to actually protecting Grand Canyon, it almost seems like they really like to campaign on it, so they don't want to fix the problem. I don't know. That's maybe me overthinking it, but we did get our senators and our representatives to introduce. So Grijalva, who's not my representative, but Grijalva did introduce the Grand Canyon Protection Act, and then Mark Kelly and Kirsten Sinema did introduce it in the Senate. It passed the House last year, and it's passed the House before, but it did not pass the Senate. And I don't feel like the senators did a ton to push it through the Senate last year when there might have been a chance of getting it through both houses of Congress. So yes, you can absolutely reach out to your senators, and you should, because I think that it's really important that they hear how important this is and how many people really care about it. The sad truth is that they have been kind of, you know, not very, I'm trying to find nice words to use. They haven't been very aggressive in actually making sure legislation is passed. But they need to hear it. They need to hear it a lot, especially going into, you know, future elections, etc.
So I'm going to email to all of you that registered for this, the information on that slide you showed with the contact information and the QR code and all that. So I want to make sure you all have that. Any other comments, please go ahead.
Yeah, and it could just be discussion points. You don't have to necessarily have a question for me, but if you have something you want to say. I know 40 minutes is a lot of time to sit and stare at a screen, so I won't take it personally.
Part of your coalition, obviously, is the Grand Canyon Trust. Don't they seem to have a pretty strong funder base and board power base at all to help influence this?
That would be a great question for Grand Canyon Trust. Yeah, you know, Sierra Club's a little bit more grassroots. And so our role is really to try and you know, get all of you to take action when there's chances. You know, Grand Canyon Trust, they've done a lot of good media work with video and photography, and you know, telling the story and getting it out that way. But yeah, I can't comment on their funding levels, unfortunately.
Allison, who owns the mine? If I remember back during the protest, it was the French government that was videoing all of the protesters.
So the mine ownership has changed several times. So right now it's Energy Fuels, who is a Colorado-based subsidiary of a Canadian company, and they have holdings around the world. And that's an interesting thing too. Like these uranium mines, there is no guarantee that the uranium will stay domestic once it goes on the world market. We don't know where it goes. So a lot of people talk about this being a national security issue. Well, in my eyes, the best way we could protect our national security is by not getting this stuff out into existence, right? Like we should be protecting these resources and keeping them in the ground. So yeah, so right now it is a Canadian company, but it's changed ownership a few times over the last few decades. And there's a lot of movement on the market right now. There's been a lot of different buyouts. So there's different companies buying each other's resources. And, you know, I think a lot of it is kind of a shell game for the purpose of the stockholders.
I wish we could get the 1872 Mining Act revised.
Yes, yeah, that is a very core issue that is problematic. Whenever anyone talks about, oh, the Wilderness Act is an ancient law. I mean, the Wilderness Act isn't perfect, or the Endangered Species Act is an ancient law. Yeah, it's not perfect either, but the Mining Act needs to be reformed. Like, that is just, we're not walking around with shovels and pickaxes anymore, and we have way too much ability to do way too much damage way too fast.
Just so people know, the 1872 Mining Act was passed in 1872, but it was intended to promote the development of the West when the United States had just acquired the lands west of the Mississippi River. And it seems like we've pretty well occupied it since then, and maybe the original purpose of that act isn't necessary. But one of the really bad things about it that annoys me is that these mining companies don't need this. They can take minerals from public land without paying any royalties. And so you have a foreign company comes in and takes resources that belong to all the people in the United States, and they don't pay for it. So that happens a lot with copper mines. It happens with this uranium thing. It's very unfortunate. It's not fair. This needs to get fixed. And the Sierra Club's been working on that for a long time. I don't know if you know how long, Allison, but
Well, Sierra Club's been around since the Mining Act practically, so
decades, let's just say that. Yeah, we've been working on that for decades. So
yeah. And like, so with this mine in particular, you know, the amount of bond that they put up, we think is way too low. And this is also another problem with these mines. They'll not have enough cash on hand to close the mine properly. And then they'll like sell to another company, and that company goes bankrupt, and then you can't really trace who's responsible. And so there's a lot of problems, and they don't even have to put the cash up. They like put it in an account and promise that they're gonna use it. There's so many things wrong. I see there's a question in the chat about Tusayan. How does the community of Tusayan feel about the development proposals? Hate to see a Gatlinburg at the entrance to the Grand Canyon. Yeah, so the community of Tusayan is legitimately split about the development proposals. And the problem is, I think everybody is in agreement, and Sierra Club is in agreement too. And so are many of our conservation colleagues. There is a legitimate need in the town of Tusayan for workforce housing. Right now, if you live in Tusayan, it is likely that your employer owns your home. And if you get fired, you are going to lose your dwelling. That is especially a problem right now with the cost of living in neighboring communities like Flagstaff being as high as it is. People, you lose your job, you have nowhere to go. And so we understand, and Grand Canyon National Park also needs housing. Like there are problems with needing to put people. So what they need though is not what's being proposed though. They need things like rental units that aren't employer owned, or, you know, smaller homes that people could buy and stay in. And we would support that at the proper scale. The problem is that the developers are promised to people that the only way that you're going to get a house, like if we build this, everybody's going to have a home. And they've made a lot of empty promises to people. And so there's a lot of people who feel that if this development goes through, that they will have things they need, like a laundry facility and, you know, a supermarket and a house. And I sympathize with those needs. I feel that a lot of people are being used by developers. You know, I mean, if they wanted to build housing on this Camper Village parcel and make it legitimately available to people at an affordable price, it could have been done by now. And they haven't. And what they are trying to build is a mega development that is marketed for people outside the region and not towards people who actually live there. And they're not even, I mean, like this EKN development, they're going to have housing for like a 90 or 100. They're going to need more staff than that. So where are those people going to go? Like the whole thing is just absurd. So there are people in Tucson that support this because they think that they'll get something out of it. But it's very interesting because when there's votes for things like, whether to allow an increase on building heights or, the non-stilo sides do often win those votes. So there is a slim margin that seems opposed to it.
So if this development goes in Tucson, air traffic is going to explode. How does this relate to Grand Canyon Airport?
That's a great question. And the Grand Canyon Airport is owned by the state, and they would like to get commercial service, like regularly scheduled commercial service there. In the past, they've had that and they haven't been able to keep it going because they haven't had enough people flying in and out. What would happen? There is a master development plan that's relatively new for that airport. What could happen is that if there's enough hotels there, they would bring in commercially scheduled service. People would fly into Tucson, stay in a hotel there, and fly out of Tucson, and they wouldn't need to go anywhere else in the state. And that would greatly increase air traffic over Grand Canyon and around Grand Canyon. It would also increase night air traffic, which right now isn't really a problem because most of the air traffic in and out of that airport is air tours. So if they expand that, they're going to have a lot more traffic and people centered right there at the edge of the canyon who are going to be totally dependent upon the resources of the canyon. Steve, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I just want to comment that besides air traffic exploding, light pollution would explode. And one of the more sickening things in that video that you showed was a quote, something like, "See the night sky better than you've ever seen it before," alluding to an artificial sky that they would produce in a planetarium. And to me, it's like we've got a wonderful night sky that nature provided if we can just keep screwing it up. So I would like to see, and I know there's an International Dark Sky Association certified site in the Grand Canyon, for night sky viewing, programs, ranger-led programs, etc. And development must be constrained also by light pollution concerns. Just another point to raise that I don't think was mentioned in the presentation.
It was not. So thank you for catching that, because that is something I do often talk about, and I didn't. I was trying to cover a lot of ground today. So thank you for picking that up. Yeah, they actually said like night skies, and you'll see like wildlife, and you'll see trees and hydrology. I mean, all these things because there won't be water flowing in Grand Canyon, and you won't be able to see the night sky, and all the wildlife is going to be, just animals that are attracted to the grass that they plant or repelled by the traffic. So yeah, the night sky issue is a huge one, because even if you have night sky friendly policies, that much development is going to make a lot of light immediately adjacent to the canyon. And that is a huge fear of the National Park Service. It's a huge fear of a lot of people. So thank you for picking up on that. That is definitely one of the reasons that we are opposing this development as well. Interestingly, another thing I didn't mention is that Camper Village parcel, they want to bury all of the parking for that. So they want to have it all underground. Now that is Kaibab limestone, and it's going to take quite a bit of dynamite to blast that all out. And then it's also in a floodplain. So it's going to take pumps to keep water from flooding their underground parking facility. I mean, people come in here and they do not know what the local topography is and what the values are here, and they just want to make money. And I don't know, it's interesting to watch and scary. But yeah, I'm not sure how much capability we're going to have to be able to fight the one development that's in town. I think the floodplain is going to be a big problem for them, honestly. But yeah, night lighting, especially if those other parcels get developed, it's gonna be it could be a huge loss potentially. Yeah.
If the development occurs, I'm afraid that the next thing they would be demanding is a freeway to 40. And of course, that would be another big cut to wildlife migration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The traffic is gonna be a giant issue. And I mean, an airport expansion could have a huge, or an airport, increased development at the airport could also have a huge effect on wildlife. So that's a big worry. The easements that they want to those two parcels, I think would be like 80 feet wide. So, just the massive amount of development on that footprint would just be awful in so many interacting ways. So.
So
yeah.
Allison, what does the National Park Service think about all this?
Yeah, so the National Park Service has in the past taken a very strong stance against this mega development at Tusayan. The current superintendent is not being very vocal about it, but they are paying attention and they are very worried. One thing that is happening right now that is good on the federal level is that the Forest Service and the Park Service have decided that they're only going to meet with the developers if they are both in the room, so that like the developers can't tell one of them one thing and tell the other another thing, or that the agencies are accountable to one another, because the Kaibab National Forest does take very seriously that they are a neighbor to Grand Canyon National Park, to a natural wonder of the world. So there hasn't been like a lot of vocalization from the Park Service recently, but in the past, when Davey Baraga was superintendent, he was very, very aggressive against this. And I do hope that the current superintendent, if this starts, like if it goes to a NEPA process, an environmental impact statement comes out, et cetera, that he will be as vocal. Because actually in the past, it hasn't just been Grand Canyon National Park that's commented against it. It actually went to, trying to remember, it was like the vice deputy, I don't remember the title, but it went like higher up into the national level of the National Park Service, and they did comment against it.
So is there any kind of a timeline on this that
It's a very good question. I've been talking to the Forest Service and trying to pry some information out of them, and they have been really tight-lipped about what they're gonna do. They did accept the proposal. So when they accept a special use permit proposal, there's a number of screening criteria. And what happened last time, so in 2016, even though the Forest Service had accepted the proposal, after the Havasupai tribe, the National Park Service, and others opposed it, they said that it no longer met those screening criteria to do further analysis. All of a sudden they accepted this newer proposal, and the conservation groups think that it still violates those screening criteria. So we have sent a number of letters to the Forest Service explaining how those screening criteria are not met by the proposal. And so I am not sure what's going to happen. The Forest Service is not really telling me what direction they're moving in. They're willing to talk. They're telling me what's going on. They're giving me updates when I ask for them. But we don't necessarily know if it's going to go to NEPA again or when. And so, yeah, I wish I had an answer for that. It would make my life so much easier. Question in the chat: do you think it would make a difference if the tribes were allowed to be partners in managing the parks? Yes. So Grand Canyon National Park right now is talking a lot about co-management, and something that is upsetting to a lot of people that I'm talking to, and I find it troubling myself, is that when they're talking about co-management, they're really talking about the economics. They're talking about creating a place where people can sell their goods and make money. And they're not necessarily talking about co-management as far as allowing the tribes a say in maybe how people are moving through the park, or where they're moving through the park, or different operational decisions about the park. And so I would like to see co-management a little bit more broadly interpreted. I think what's happening is that, they're starting with what they have the ability to start with to see how that goes. I do know that the current superintendent is trying to be very progressive on this, trying to do a lot with hiring so that they could get people within the park and within the Park Service who are members of the affiliated tribes. And I know he's trying to be creative. So hopefully there will be more coming than just the economic level of co-management. But I do think that if the tribes were legitimately partners and collaborators in making decisions for the park and in how people speak for that land, I think that they would be a lot more aggressive in defending that landscape. And might just have different ideas about what defending that landscape means. It may not mean the same thing to a lot of tribal entities as it may to me or to any of you. And I don't know who on this call may be Indigenous, so I don't want to make an assumption about who is here. But yeah, and we also need to recognize that it's 11 different tribes. So there's a lot of variation amongst people in what the important aspects of that landscape are and how they're connected to it and how to best protect it. Yeah. And the comment is, it is their land after all. And yes, I would agree with that. And so we need to realize that if the tribes had a larger role, that might mean that I might not be able to go out and recreate in the same way that I've been used to. And, I think we all need to approach this with humility and realize, what privilege we have had in this landscape. And, as decisions get made in the future about who has a say about this land.
The last time I was at Desert Tower, they had 2 Navajo interpretive rangers on duty, women who were wonderful communicators and wonderful to talk to. And one of them made a huge point that they were working to get the signs changed. Some of the signs say, the first man to see the Grand Canyon was some Anglo dude or Hispanic and explorer, and that's just not right. So they were clearly seeing things that needed to be changed in the interpretive sense, and we're working on it. And I thought that was very cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I that they've renamed Indian Gardens to Havasupai Gardens, and in recognition of the Havasupai tribal members that were violently kicked out of that area so that people could go on vacation. And I would love to see more presence of the people, of their messaging. Who knows where things might go in the future. Maybe there might be a return of agricultural use. And these lands were not unpeopled when they were made into national parks, and in many places they were actually gardened and tended, and so it'll be interesting to see what the future holds for those types of decisions. Yeah, for relationships between the tribal entities and the Park Service.
And all of you listening have a role to play in deciding that future. So that's why we're going to give you some action items, contacts, and links, and hope that you'll get involved in protecting this incredible landscape and cultural resource that is the Grand Canyon.
Mhm.
So it seems like the discussion is kind of tapering off here, and Allison has got good stamina. She's sticking with it. Are there any more? Speak up if there are. If not, we'll wind this up. Okay, hearing none. Oh,
I'm so
ahead.
grateful to all of you for sticking around for an hour with me and listening and being interested in this subject. So thank you so much, and feel free to reach out to me if you have further questions too.
Thank you.
Okay, let's call it quits here, and I'll end the meeting, and y'all go and have a great evening, and I'll send you an email with some information. So thank you for attending, and good night.
Good night, everyone.